2 hours after our baby was born, I looked at my husband, waiting for him to hold our child. Instead, he leaned close and said, "I already have a son with someone else. I am not signing anything for this baby." I did not cry. I did not argue. I only looked at the tiny bracelet on my daughter's wrist and whispered, "Then remember this moment." The next morning, he came back asking to see us, but the folder on my bedside table had already changed everything. 2 hours after my daughter was born, I looked at my husband and waited for him to hold her. Instead, he leaned close over the hospital bed, close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath, and said, "I already have a son with someone else. I am not signing anything for this baby." I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not ask him to repeat it, because I had heard him perfectly the first time, and some part of me, the part that had spent 11 years learning to read Weston Calloway's voice the way other people read weather, understood that he had rehearsed that sentence. He had practiced it in his car, maybe, or in the elevator on the way up. He had chosen his words the way he chose everything, carefully, cleanly, with an eye toward how it would sound later if anyone ever asked him to repeat it. I only looked down at the tiny plastic bracelet on my daughter's wrist, Calloway, baby girl, 6LB as 4 Oz, and I whispered, "Then remember this moment." He straightened his gray coat like he'd just finished a phone call, not ended a marriage. "Sable," he said, "don't make this dramatic." I looked at our daughter instead of at him. She had his mouth. I noticed that immediately and felt something in my chest fold in on itself, quiet and total, like a building collapsing from the inside instead of the outside. "I have a son with Camille," he said, like he was reading the second line of a report. 4 months old. My family knows. There are things you don't understand. The monitors kept beeping, tracking a heart rate that had no idea it should have been breaking. My arms tightened around her. "I can't acknowledge her as a Calloway heir," he said. Heir. She was 2 hours old. She had been alive for less time than it takes to drive from our house to the airport, and already her father had done the math on what she was worth to him, and reached 0. He laughed after that, soft, almost fond. The laugh of a man who thinks his exhausted hormonal wife doesn't mean what she just said, who thinks that in 6 hours she'll be embarrassed by her own tone, who has never once in 11 years of marriage considered that the quiet woman across from him might be doing calculations of her own. He had no idea that an estate attorney named Josephine Marsh had been calling me for 3 weeks. I'd kept pushing her off. Grief over my uncle, 34 weeks pregnant, a work deadline, the ordinary static of a life that felt too full to add anything else. I told myself it could wait. I am, by training and by temperament, a person who verifies things before she acts on them. I had assumed whatever Josephine wanted to tell me was a formality, a folder to sign, a box to check on my Uncle Elliot's estate. I did not know yet that it was the only leverage I would ever need. That night, after Weston left without asking to hold her, after my sister Odette had driven 4 straight hours from Savannah just to sit in the vinyl chair beside my bed and hold my hand without saying anything useful because there was nothing useful to say, I finally called Josephine back. "Sable," she said, her voice sharpening the second she recognized mine. "Thank God, this can't wait anymore. Your Uncle Elliot left you a stake in Calloway Holdings, an old partnership. It predates the current corporate structure by almost 30 years. It was folded into the company when Elliot and Weston's father restructured in the 90s, and as far as I can tell, nobody ever formally dissolved the original agreement. It's still on paper. It's still enforceable." I sat up so fast I startled my own daughter awake in the bassinet beside me. "What does that mean for me?" "It means, Mrs. Calloway, that you currently hold more leverage inside that family's company than your husband has any idea exists. What do I do with that?" "Nothing tonight," Josephine said, and I could hear her already moving, papers shifting, a drawer closing. "I'm sending a courier at dawn. Don't sign anything. Don't say anything to Weston or his father about this call. Just wait for the folder." I said nothing else. I looked down at my daughter's sleeping face. She had stopped crying almost as soon as I picked her back up, like she already understood that in this family, the person who stayed calm was the one who survived, and I waited for morning. I should explain who I am, because the version of me in that hospital bed, silent and unreadable, was not an accident. It was 11 years of practice. My name is Sable Calloway, Sable Reyes, before I married into a name that meant something in 3 states, and I am a forensic accountant. I spend my professional life finding the places where numbers say one thing and reality says another. Shell companies, laundered distributions, executives who report modest salaries while their spending patterns tell a different story. I am good at my job specifically because I do not react to what I find. I document it. I build the file quietly, in full, before I ever confront anyone with a single page of it. I had used that skill on strangers for a decade. I had simply never imagined I'd need to use it on my own marriage. Weston and I met when I was 26, doing contract forensic work for a firm that did business with Calloway Holdings, a real estate and hospitality conglomerate his family had built over 3 generations, the kind of company whose name was on hotel awnings in 4 different cities. He was charming in the specific way that men who have never been told no are charming. Attentive, generous, absolutely certain that any problem could be solved by throwing enough resources and enough of his own confidence at it. His parents, Holloway and Dorothea Calloway, had been polite to me at our engagement dinner, in the exact careful way people are polite to someone they've already decided isn't quite permanent. I told myself that was normal. New money suspicion of the in-law, the kind every family has. I told myself a lot of things were normal over those 11 years. His frequent late site visits, the business trips that got longer. The way Camille Fontaine's name came up occasionally at company events, always introduced as part of the marketing team, always standing slightly too close to Weston at the edges of photographs I only saw later, tagged by other people. I noticed. I rationalized. I told myself it was nothing, because I did not yet have a file, and I do not accuse people without a file. By the time I was 6 months pregnant, I had started keeping one anyway. Not out of suspicion of an affair at first. Out of habit. Bank statements looked strange. A property in Asheville I didn't recognize, held under an LLC with Weston listed as a minority partner alongside 2 names I didn't know. A pattern of transfers to an account I couldn't trace, always under $10,000, always timed 2 or 3 days before Weston's site visits. I told myself it was tax structuring. I told myself a lot of things. I was wrong about all of it, and right about the part that mattered. Something was being hidden from me, on purpose, by someone who had decided a long time before that hospital room that I did not need to know. 3 months before the birth, Weston stopped bringing his phone into our bedroom. He said it was for better sleep. I told myself it was for better sleep. Then I found the second phone in the console of his car while looking for a parking pass. A cheap prepaid model with a single contact saved as CFE work. And I told myself work contacts get saved in strange ways sometimes. I put it back exactly where I found it and did not mention it. My hands were not steady when I closed the console. I asked him casually over dinner how the Asheville property was doing. He blinked, a half second too long, and said, "Which Asheville property?" I told myself he managed dozens of holdings and couldn't be expected to place everyone by name. I pulled the LLC filing myself that weekend while he was at a conference. Weston R. Calloway, 12% minority stake, filed 8 months prior. I told myself minority stakes in small LLCs were common in his line of work. My stomach dropped anyway. A physical, unmistakable signal that some older, more honest part of me already understood what my rational mind was still negotiating around. At a company holiday party, 7 months pregnant, I watched Camille Fontaine laugh at something Weston said with the specific ease of someone who had heard the joke before. I told myself familiarity between colleagues wasn't evidence of anything. Later that night, I found a hotel charge on a card I didn't usually monitor. A Marriott 2 hours outside the city, dated the previous month. A night Weston had told me he was in Charlotte for a vendor dinner. I told myself vendor dinners sometimes ran late enough to require a room. I did not sleep that night. I lay very still beside him and listened to him breathe and thought, with a clarity that frightened me, I am building a case against my own husband, and I have not admitted it to myself yet. 8 months pregnant, I called the hotel directly, using my maiden name and a pretext about a lost item, and confirmed the room had been booked for 2 guests. I did not confront him. I told myself I needed more before I said anything, that an accusation without a complete file was just an argument, and arguments could be denied, minimized, turned back around on me the way they always eventually were with Weston. I filed the confirmation email in a folder on a personal drive he didn't know existed. My hands shook typing the password. I told myself that was hormones. 9 months pregnant, I received a text meant for someone else. Weston's assistant forwarding a calendar note that should have gone to his personal phone. Confirmed pediatrician appointment for Beckett Thursday 2 p.m. Dr. Anwar. I did not know a Beckett. I sat with that name for 4 days before I understood what it meant, turning it over the way I'd turn over a suspicious transaction, looking for an innocent explanation that fit all the facts. There wasn't one. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set my phone down on the counter and walk into another room. I did not confront him. I went into labor 11 days later, and he still had not told me the truth. He told me instead, for the first time, in a hospital room, 2 hours after our daughter was born, when he must have believed I was too exhausted and too raw to do anything but absorb it. He was wrong about that. He had simply never had to learn what I do for a living. The folder arrived before the sun did. A courier handed it to a nurse, who set it on my bedside table without a word, in the specific quiet way people move when they sense they're delivering something heavier than paper. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there, closed, while my daughter slept against my chest, and the hospital hallway slowly woke up around us. Carts rolling, a distant baby crying 2 rooms down, the particular gray light of 6 in the morning coming through the blinds. Then Weston came back. He stood in the doorway like a man who expected the scene to have reset overnight, the way arguments used to reset after he apologized in his particular way. Flowers, a reservation somewhere I liked, an explanation that made his behavior sound almost reasonable if you didn't look at it too closely. Fresh shirt, softer voice, a coffee he had not thought to offer to share. "Can I see her?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. "Have you had time to think?" he said, filling the silence the way he always did, treating my quiet as a vacuum that existed only for him to fill. Think about what, exactly? His son, his mistress, his parents, who had apparently known for months and said nothing to me, had sat across from me at Sunday dinners and asked how I was feeling with a straight face. "I have," I said. He stepped closer, something almost hopeful crossing his face, as if 12 hours and a hospital blanket could have softened what he'd done into something forgivable. I did not hand him the baby. I laid my hand flat on the folder instead. His eyes dropped to it. "What is that?" "Something your family should have told you existed a long time ago. Sable, whatever this is, we can talk about it like adults." "We are talking like adults," I said. "You're just not used to being on this side of the conversation." His jaw tightened, the way it always did right before he chose his next careful sentence. I had watched that exact muscle move in board photos, in videos of shareholder calls, in 11 years of dinners where he was deciding how much of the truth a situation actually required. Is that from a lawyer? It's from my uncle, I said, which might be worse for you. He reached toward it. I didn't move it away. I simply didn't move at all, and something in my stillness made his hand stop before it landed. The way a man stops his hand over a stove he's suddenly unsure isn't on. What's in it? You'll find out Thursday, I said. 14th floor. Bring your father. Sable? You had 2 hours in this room to choose what kind of father you wanted to be, I said. I'm not giving you 2 more. He left without asking again. I heard his footsteps stop in the hallway, just for a second, like he was reconsidering. Then they continued and did not come back. I spent the next 3 days doing the only thing I have ever fully trusted, building the file. I called Josephine Marsh first, official record. Josephine had practiced trust and estate law for 19 years and had known my Uncle Elliot since before I was born. She had a way of speaking that made every sentence sound like it had already survived cross-examination. The partnership agreement your uncle held was never formally wound down, she told me over the phone, papers audibly shifting on her end. When Holloway restructured Callaway Holdings in 1997, he bought out most of the original minority partners, but Elliot's stake was never transferred. There's a signature missing on the dissolution paperwork. Elliot's. He told me once, years ago, that he kept it that way on purpose. He didn't trust Holloway not to eventually try something with the company that the original partners wouldn't have agreed to. He wanted a check left in place, even a quiet one. He left that stake to you specifically, Sable, in a codicil dated 4 years ago. He knew who you were becoming professionally. I think he trusted you to know what to do with it. What can I actually do with it? Legally, it gives you standing to request financial records, attend certain board proceedings, and object to specific categories of corporate action, particularly anything touching outside investment structures the original partnership agreement was designed to prevent. A pause. Sable, does the name Meridian Capital Partners mean anything to you? It did not. Not yet. It would, within 18 hours. I called my former colleague David Okonkwo Ferris next, a fraud examiner I'd worked alongside for 6 years, a man with 14 years in forensic accounting and a reputation for finding exactly the kind of thing people spend a great deal of money to hide. I sent him the Asheville LLC filing, the pattern of sub-$10,000 transfers I'd tracked for months, and the name Josephine had given me. He called back 4 hours later, and his voice had the specific flatness professionals get when they found something worse than they expected. Sable, Meridian Capital Partners is a shell. It's registered in Delaware, single-member LLC, and that single member is Camille Fontaine. Over the past 14 months, roughly $2.3 million has moved from Callaway Holdings operating accounts into Meridian, structured as consulting fees and strategic advisory services. There's no consulting contract on file that I can find. There's no deliverable. It's a straight line, Sable, just built to look crooked. Can you prove where it ends up? I already did. Meridian funded the Asheville property purchase. It funded a trust established for a child named Beckett Fontaine, and it funded 4 payments to a numbered account that traces back to Holloway Callaway's personal signing authority, which means your father-in-law didn't just know about this. There's a real chance he approved it. I sat with that for a long moment, my daughter asleep against my shoulder, and felt something settle in me instead of break. The particular calm that used to come in my old life before Weston, at the exact moment a case finally made sense. Send me everything, I said. Formatted the way you'd format it for a court exhibit. Label it clean. Sable, this is your family. It was, I said. Now it's just a case. The third call was to Detective Renata Solis of the County Financial Crimes Unit, a 22-year veteran I'd consulted for years on cases involving embezzlement from closely held companies. I didn't call to file a report, not yet. I called because I needed to understand exactly which threads, if pulled, would trigger something neither Weston nor his father could stop once it started. If what you're describing checks out, Detective Solis told me, you're not looking at a family disagreement anymore. Diverting corporate funds through a shell entity to conceal a personal relationship and fund undisclosed obligations, depending on how the board characterized those payments and filings, that could reach wire fraud. And if shareholders were misled about the company's financial position, securities fraud isn't off the table either. I'd want to see the exhibits before I say more than that. But Sable, don't tip your hand before Thursday. Let the board see it cold. By Wednesday night, Josephine's office had assembled a binder 3 inches thick, the original partnership agreement, the missing dissolution signature, David's financial trace, bank records, the Asheville LLC filing, the hotel confirmation I'd gathered myself 8 months pregnant with hands that had not stopped shaking since. I read every page twice. Then I closed the binder and looked at my daughter, asleep in the bassinet beside my bed, and said out loud to no one, your father had 2 hours to choose you. He chose wrong. That's not going to be your fault, and it's not going to be your problem. It's about to be his. Thursday, 14th floor, glass conference room. The city laid out gray and ordinary below it, entirely uninterested in what was about to happen inside. Weston, his father, Holloway, 6 board members, outside counsel for the company, and me, my daughter asleep against my chest in a carrier, because I had made a decision, deliberate and specific, that she would be present for this. Not because a boardroom is a place for an infant, but because I wanted every person in that room to look at her while they decided what kind of company and what kind of family they actually were. The binder sat closed on the table in front of Josephine. Weston walked in last. Same blue tie I'd bought him for our anniversary 2 years earlier. earlier. The pattern faded slightly from too many washes, a detail so small and domestic it almost undid the careful composure I'd built over the past 4 days. He looked at me, then at the daughter he still hadn't held. Something shifted across his face. Not regret, I understood immediately. Recognition, the specific look of a man realizing the room had not arranged itself the way he'd expected. Holloway opened the meeting himself, his voice cold and formal in the way old money's voice goes cold, like frost forming instead of temperature dropping. We're here to clarify matters affecting corporate representations made during the current financing period, he said, as though that sentence could contain what was actually about to happen. Weston's eyes moved from his father, to the board, to the binder. His jaw tightened the way it always did, right before he chose his next careful lie. Josephine rested one hand flat on the binder. She did not open it yet. Before we go further, she said, looking directly at Weston, there's something the board needs to see. She opened it to the first exhibit, the original 1988 partnership agreement, Elliott Callaway's signature at the bottom in ink that had gone faintly brown with age, and beside it, the dissolution paperwork from 1997, with its single glaring gap where a second signature should have been. Mrs. Callaway, Sable, currently holds Elliott Callaway's original partnership stake in this company, Josephine said. It was never legally dissolved, which means she has had, for the past several years, standing to request full financial disclosure and to object to categories of transaction. This partnership agreement was specifically written to prevent. I want that established clearly before we go any further, because it changes who is actually allowed to be in this room. One of the board members, a woman named Priyasha Deol, who I recognized from an annual report photo, went very still. If that's accurate, we should have been informed of that stake years ago. You should have, Josephine agreed. I'd ask Mr. Holloway Callaway why you weren't. Holloway said nothing. His hands, folded on the table, had gone slightly white at the knuckles. I noticed it because I had spent 11 years learning to read exactly that kind of stillness in his son, and watching it appear on the father's hands instead felt like watching a family trait finally surface where everyone could see it. A man I didn't recognize, seated near the end of the table with a legal pad he had not yet written on, cleared his throat. For the record, I'm Anders Whitlock, outside counsel retained by the board's audit committee, not company counsel. I was asked to observe today's proceedings independently. I'd like that distinction noted in the minutes before we continue. He glanced at Griffin Achebe-Voss, a small professional acknowledgement passing between them, two lawyers recognizing that the room had just split into sides that weren't going to reconverge. My daughter stirred against my chest, a small sound, not quite a cry. I shifted my weight without looking down, the motion so practiced after 14 weeks of motherhood that it required no thought at all, and felt several people in the room glance at her and then quickly away, as if her presence made the numbers on the table harder to look at directly. Good, I thought. It should. Josephine turned to the second exhibit. David's trace laid out clean and undeniable. The Meridian Capital Partners shell, the $2.3 million in unsupported consulting payments, the line running directly to Camille Fontaine, to the Asheville property, to a trust for a 4-month-old named Beckett, to 4 transfers bearing Holloway's own signing authority. The room went silent in the specific way rooms go silent when the temperature of a conversation changes permanently. Somewhere behind me, a laptop fan clicked on, absurdly loud in the quiet, and no one moved to silence it. Josephine slid 3 pages across the table, labeled, in David's careful formatting, Exhibit C, and let them sit there a moment before anyone reached for them. These are the wire transfer records, cross-referenced against the annual filings submitted to shareholders in the 2 most recent fiscal years. You'll see the Meridian payments listed under Strategic Advisory Services, External. I'd invite anyone at this table to locate the corresponding advisory agreement. There isn't one. My colleague looked. Priyasha Deol picked up the pages first. I watched her read the same line twice, her mouth tightening at the second pass in a way that told me she'd found the number before Josephine said it aloud. Weston, Josephine said, did you authorize consulting payments to Meridian Capital Partners? His mouth opened. Nothing careful came out this time. That was structured by counsel. It was, which counsel? She said. It wasn't a question so much as a wall. He didn't answer. Outside counsel for the company, a sharp-eyed man named Griffin Achebe-Voss, who I'd later learn had 11 years representing the board specifically, not the family, leaned forward for the first time. I need to be direct with everyone in this room. If these transfers were misrepresented in board filings as legitimate consulting expenses, and if company funds were used to establish a personal trust without disclosure, we are not looking at an internal family matter. We are looking at potential securities violations that this board has a fiduciary obligation to report. I'd strongly advise that no one in this room say anything further without independent counsel present. Holloway finally spoke, his voice lower now, stripped of its earlier frost. This can be handled privately. There's no need to. $2.3 million of shareholder capital doesn't get handled privately, Priyasha Deol said, and something in her tone told me she had been waiting a long time to say something exactly like that to Holloway Callaway. I'm calling for an independent audit today. Weston looked at me. For the first time in 11 years, I watched him fully understand that I was not going to soften the moment for him. I was not going to fill the silence. I simply held my daughter and let him sit inside the consequence of a decision he'd made 2 hours after she was born, believing I was too broken to ever do anything with it. Sable, he said, quiet quiet now, none of the practiced calm left in it. I didn't think, no, I said. You didn't. The audit took 6 weeks. I did not attend most of it. I had a newborn, and I had, for the first time in a long time, the strange luxury of letting other qualified people do the finding while I did the healing. The independent forensic team, led, at Priyasha Deol's insistence, by an outside firm with no prior relationship to the Callaways, confirmed everything David had traced and found more. The Meridian payments had been misclassified in 2 consecutive annual filings as legitimate advisory expenses, which meant the company had, in fact, misrepresented its financials to shareholders. Holloway's signing authority appeared on transfers he later claimed. In a deposition Josephine described to me afterward as the most uncomfortable 90 minutes I've watched in a decade, that he did not specifically recall authorizing. The board voted 5-1 to terminate Weston's employment with Callaway Holdings and to refer the matter to the Securities and Exchange Commission and to county prosecutors. Anders Whitlock, the independent counsel who'd insisted on having his name entered into the record that first day, was the one who ultimately drafted the referral letter. Josephine told me afterward that his insistence on documenting his independence from the very first minute of that meeting was what let the board's eventual findings survive a challenge from Holloway's personal attorneys, who tried, unsuccessfully, to argue the entire audit process had been tainted by familial conflict of interest on Josephine's part. Holloway was permitted to resign rather than be removed, a mercy the board extended, Priyasha told me later, only because the company's stock would have taken a harder hit from an outright ouster of its founder's name than from a quiet resignation. He kept his shares. He did not keep his title, his board seat, or, within about 4 months, his marriage. When Dorothea filed for divorce, citing, among other things, knowledge of the Meridian arrangement that she said she'd been made to keep quiet about for over a year, Weston was charged with wire fraud in connection with the misclassified transfers. Detective Solis's unit built the criminal case in parallel with the SEC's civil inquiry, and 8 months after that boardroom, he pled guilty to a reduced charge in exchange for cooperation against Holloway, whose case moved more slowly and, as far as I know, is still working its way through the county prosecutor's office as I write this. Camille Fontaine was never charged criminally. There was no clear evidence she'd known the funding source was fraudulent rather than simply generous, but she lost her position at the company within a week of the audit becoming public, and the last I heard, she and Weston were no longer together. I did not ask, and no one offered. Some information I no longer had any professional or personal reason to collect. My Uncle Elliot's stake, once the dust settled, and Josephine finished untangling exactly what it entitled me to, turned out to be worth considerably more than either Weston or Holloway had ever accounted for in their planning. I did not take a board seat. I did not want one. I sold a portion of the position back to the company at a valuation Josephine negotiated with what I can only describe as ruthless patience, and I kept a smaller stake, enough, she told me, to make sure nobody in that family ever forgets you're still watching. I used the proceeds for exactly 2 things: a trust for my daughter that no one but me can touch, and the quiet, unglamorous work of rebuilding a life I hadn't expected to need to rebuild at 34. My daughter is 14 months old now. She has Weston's mouth and my mother's stubbornness, and on the rare occasions he sees her, supervised, at Josephine's insistence, until his sentencing is finalized, he still looks at her the way he looked at that folder on my bedside table, like he still doesn't fully understand what it contained, or how much it cost him not to ask. I kept her hospital bracelet. It's in a small box in my closet, the plastic gone slightly brittle with time, next to the courier envelope the folder first arrived in. I don't look at either often, but I know exactly where they are. Some nights when she's finally asleep and the house is quiet in the specific way a house gets quiet once you've stopped waiting for someone else to come home, I think about the version of that hospital room where I cried instead of went still, where I argued instead of called Josephine back. I don't think that version of me would have lost, exactly. I think she would have taken longer to win and paid more for it along the way. I have learned in the years since that the moment people expect you to fall apart is very often the moment you have the clearest view of exactly what needs to happen next. Weston mistook my silence for defeat. It was the opposite. It was a woman doing the only thing she has ever fully trusted herself to do, building the file, quietly, in full, before saying a single word she couldn't prove. He had 2 hours to decide what kind of father he wanted to be. I only needed 1 folder to decide what kind of mother I already was.